Hello and welcome back to OCD Coded. I'm Erin Brown, licensed marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor. I have OCD myself, and my hope with this is to help you learn how to decode your OCD and to turn it into a superpower. And if you want more information, please check out my website at ocdcoded.learnworlds.com. So today we are going to talk about the drama triangle and OCD. And the drama triangle is something that I do not think gets talked about enough, um, even in therapy situations. And how to really navigate that on a good day, as well as when you have OCD. So talking a little bit about that let me start with describing what the drama triangle is. And it's that idea that, that we get stuck in this triangulation and in families and relationships and all different types of systems. And the three different types are there's a rescuer, there's a victim, and there's a persecutor. Um, and so those are the roles that people get stuck in, and that when one person kind of flips a role, then it kind of forces the other people into that role. And it can happen a lot in families. I've seen it recently in the way of, where the child, and with school refusal, like kind of trying to like refusing to go to school or refusing to do homework. And how that can be such a thing with neurodivergence is school is not set up for, OCD, and how hard that is to navigate that and to get to the point where it's just shutting down, and how to validate that kid instead of, you know, um, feed that OCD, and how I talked about in the previous episode with Joanne. But for this situation, it's like one parent is the rescuer parent. The mom in this situation was the rescuer, and she was kept trying to swoop in and rescue the kid. And the dad was seen as the persecutor, where, he was just wanting the child to go to school and to do their homework. But it was like he was set up in this way where he could only be in that persecutor role, that no matter what he did. And it's really challenging. The family felt really stuck, and it's really hard. And part of what's hard about that, it's like there's hard things about being in each one of those positions. The rescuer does tend to be the fixer, the people pleaser, the the mode. I mean, it doesn't even mean a person is a people pleaser, like that's who you are as a person, but that we all tend to have a part of us that can be a people pleaser. Some have more stronger parts than others about that. And then how to feel like we just have to swoop in and rescue, but then it feels like our needs are always last. And then in the victim, it can be really hard to either admit that we've been a victim or to recognize it, because it might have just been what we thought was normal in whatever way. But it also, can be really hard. It can feel safer to be the victim in some ways, to feel like I can't do it, someone else come do it. And it can also be a survival skill, is one way that people survive trauma and all of that kind of things, which in the quick review of the five F's, which it used to just be fight or flight, and then they added freeze, and then now there's fawn and fatigue. And so fawn is kind of like that idea of, if someone points a gun at you and says, give me all your money, and you just hand over your wallet, and then later you're like, why did I hand over my money? Why didn't I scream or say no or run away, or whatever kind of thing, and blame ourselves for that trauma reaction. And so it becomes so difficult to know. And that's a lot of like the drama triangle, could also be called the trauma triangle in a lot of ways. And I'm excited to say I have a coworker who is developing a game, like a family game based on the drama triangle, so you can help to identify it more and then work it out. And so I'm really excited for when that comes out. I'll let y'all know. But that the goal with it is, to see how, like, that part of how you break out of that cycle is by recognizing that at some times we are each of these roles. And the more we try and fight against being one of these roles, either not admitting it or not wanting to, or just feeling completely incapacitated or paralyzed to change it, like there's a fear, that comes with taking control of our lives, or breaking out of roles and old patterns, because we're so afraid of that unknown, what it means. It's kind of like the devil we know versus the devil we know don't. I would rather keep staying in this drama triangle just because at least I know it and it's familiar, and then try and break out of it. But the hard part is then that triangle just gets repeated in relationships throughout, people's entire lives. And they think that that's comfortable because it's known to them. And so they think that's what they're looking for in some way. And I see couples in session just trying to get each other to prove their love to each other on a constant basis, and how hard it is to trust and to feel self-contained enough to feel worthy enough of love that, I can know I am worthy of love even if my partner isn't showing me love. But my gosh, how hard that is to do, and how hard that is to work toward. And especially when there's been a history of trauma and OCD and all of those things. And with OCD, with it, it becomes so hard because OCD really takes over responsibility for everything. And they tend to flip between these cycles very, I don't want to say quickly, but I feel like there's the obsession and the fear, and then the compulsion. Sort of the compulsion can be to switch into some of these different roles. And so that can be even harder to identify. And it feels like it's helping a little bit at first, but then it just tends to, make it all worse or harder or not help in whatever way. And so that idea of like, the way we have to, so for OCD, being able to recognize that, yes, sometimes I have been the victim, sometimes I have been the rescuer, and even sometimes I have been the persecutor. That is so difficult for OCD because one of OCD's main fears is something about I am bad or wrong or harmful, to the world in some way, and feeling this over responsibility for that, and then the fear of it. And so trying to overcorrect it in a way and not. And I think it's so important with OCD to think about how we can take responsibility for what is ours, but without shame and blame. And that can be such a hard thing to do, but it's so important that shame and blame doesn't work. We know this, yet we continue to do it to ourselves, to children. But it is clearly documented in research that positive reinforcement is what works. Like, how do we focus on, or how do we highlight what someone is doing well, including ourselves? And with OCD, that is so hard. And it's, in that drama triangle, there is no healthy version in that. There's no celebrating successes in a healthy way. It's full of jealousy and competition and envy and deep feelings of emptiness and or rage, and that, and that feeling like that stuck and that powerless to switch those roles. But that to really having to understand that, yes, there have been times when I have been each of those roles, and that that I have to be able to take responsibility for the times that I have been in each of those without shame and blame. And then that the only role that I have any power over changing is rescuer, from rescuer to healer. And I think that that is such a powerful one, the idea, so be able to switch um to not a rescuer where I'm essentially enabling the other people. Like if I swoop in to help, then while I am swooping in to help, it's the whole teach a horse how to, or yeah, teach a man to fish. There's the two. There's a lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But then there's also the, you can give a man a fish or teach a man to fish, and or person, I should say. And so that like you can teach someone to fish was so much more valuable than just swooping in and rescuing them. And that I think is one of those examples of that. And that what we're trying to say is how do I help? And I have focus on my own healing. And I take that very seriously as a therapist, that like I can only take clients as high on the mountain as I've climbed before. And so I have to make sure I'm continually working on climbing my own mountains so that I can help other people too. And so with that, I think of how like that working on healing myself does help others, and that we all tend to kind of look at everyone else and be like, this is what you should do. But our own advice is always the best. And so being able to think about what ways can I be what ways can I be the healer instead of the rescuer, whether that's focusing on my own healing. Maybe I need to see the situation differently. Maybe I need to, give the other person some space because, again, if I swoop in and rescue, then the victim feels disempowered. And while it's like that push pull, like I feel like with a teenager too, or with any kid, they don't want the boundaries, but they also do, like they don't want the boundaries, and it's almost their job to like fight against the boundaries, but ultimately they really deep down want those boundaries to help them feel safe. They want to feel like the parent has healthy, loving boundaries so that that child can feel safe within it. So it's, how to help understanding these other people in our lives and how to start to realize that, if I can have some acknowledgement and take responsibility for my own times that I've been each of those roles, the rescuer, the victim, or the persecutor, then I start to build more compassion for myself and then also more compassion for others when they are in that role. And it's easier for me not to get stuck or swept into that kind of current of, pointing fingers and not me, but it's you, or like, just all the different ways that that plays out and how hard that is. And, but that, that there's so much hope. And that's what we're trying to really come back to is with OCD, the goal, OCD wants a certainty. And so OCD wants an assurance a lot of times. And so what we're practicing is that really hard difference between what is giving an assurance and what is actually helping. And so to be able to be able to acknowledging that for me and taking responsibility in a way that I could feel proud of myself, the way that I could say, like, yes, I did that. It doesn't mean that's who I am as a person and I am learning from it. But that before I would just, I would make a mistake and then realize it and then beat myself up for so long that I would miss all the other opportunities I had to make it right or try again different next time. And because I was so, and I think that's such one of the hard parts about OCD is we are stuck in our heads so very much that then it becomes so hard to engage with the outside world or even change patterns because it's so autopilot in so many ways. And so such a point of this is to become more conscious and to just to pause. And as talked about in the webinar that I highly recommend, and the goal is to do another one soon to kind of elaborate on the different parts of this where it's just like the pause. How can I pause and check in with myself? How can I, that the goal is to be able to recognize that I am like that I have OCD. I am not OCD, just like all the other stuff. I have perfectionism, even though I am not perfect and I can do that. And where I have been the victim, but does not mean I am a victim. And we're really trying to make sure to separate that out, that that doesn't define who you are, that none of this defines who you are, and that to continue to be able to transform ourselves. But how with OCD, that is so difficult again, because the unknown is the most difficult thing. That transformation feels like the scariest thing ever too, because we don't know what's on the other side of it. Even when we know or really feel that like it'll be a good thing, good. But like, that it'll I say that in quotes because I don't want to separate things into that binary, just good and bad kind of way. And it makes me think of another parable, I guess you would call it, but where, the guy keeps saying, maybe good, maybe bad, who knows, like every time something happens. And because we don't know, like maybe it seems good in the moment, but we don't realize until later that it wasn't that thing. And that so in the example, it's like, that the horse runs away and everyone's like, oh, that's so bad. And he's like, maybe good, maybe bad. And then the horse comes back and with a bunch of other horses and he's like, and everyone's like, oh, that's good. And the other guy's like, maybe good, maybe bad. And then, the son gets hurt on the horse. And so then it's maybe good, maybe bad. And then the son, is protected in some way because he was hurt. And so it goes on and on. But the whole point of that is how OCD is so difficult with this, because that maybe, maybe not, while that is the antidote to OCD, like, and that's, that it becomes so hard to sit in that place to say, okay, maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'm the victim in this, maybe not. Maybe I'm the persecutor in this, maybe not. Maybe I'm the rescuer in this, maybe not. Like, can we be curious? Can we have more fluidity instead of rigidity? But again, because OCD wants that known, it can feel so rigid. Like we have to have everything fit into this box to understand it. And only then can I move forward. But then if something doesn't fit in this box, then I don't know how to move forward. And it just it's a exhausting cycle. And that the hope is by starting to just identify that drama triangle, just even knowing what it is and being able to start to see it. I've heard it said that like awareness is 90% of the work, that being aware of it and then grieving that awareness some too. But then, and that like then being able to change the patterns, that we really have to pause and be aware of what's going on before we can make any kind of change. And so, like, just being able to know the drama triangle exists, start to recognize when you see it in your life, or meditate on, or just ask yourself, which role do I feel today? What have I been feeling most lately? Do I identify with one of these the most, or do I reject one of these roles the most? And can I just be curious about how I feel about that and start to just sit with that feeling without having to have a known, even if it's just for a couple minutes at a time. And so that is some of the suggestions for today. I hope that you practice that. I'd love to hear how it goes for you, or if you have any of your own tips to suggest also. And the plan will be to come back together again next week and talk more about it. I hope you have a good one. See you next time.